I was talking backstage with Mr. David. What's interesting is that we have commercial perspective on AI, a very humanist perspective on AI, Olivia, maybe conceptual and visionary, which is you, Mr. Ford. You're impersonating that. And I think one of the most interesting angles here on AI is represented by you, Rector. I understand that there's a lot of work that you put into robotics and virtual reality, and there's a lot of research that you're doing. And I would start this debate with you first. And my question is, how do we embrace this coexistence that, as Paul said, we have AI around for the past 70 years, but in the last couple of years, we kind of feel forced to make amends with a technology and tools that we don't really know.
Okay. First of all, I'm not here as a rector. I'm a psychologist, and most importantly, I work in the field of cognitive science. And cognitive science, in a way, contain artificial intelligence together with psychology, neuroscience, anthropology, philosophy, and linguistics. So I try to see artificial intelligence in this context. And very simply, to say something to just start the debates, maybe, from my perspective, artificial intelligence, of course, is not good or bad in itself. However, it could become good or bad depending how we use it. And from my perspective, the whole idea, I think that Elon Musk mentioned that and others, let's decide that we will stop the research for a while in artificial intelligence because we don't know what is happening and so on. I think that is a mistake, because nobody can stop the development of a specific technology. If you are doing that, be sure that the research in artificial intelligence will go in dark zones, it will go in secret services, it will go in the army, and the civil control will be lost, and the academic control. So let's push the development of artificial intelligence, but we think, from the academic perspective, that we should have at least two major constraints. The first constraint would be related to ethics. I mean, what is very important is to develop the technology, but be sure that it does good and no bad, right? And maybe you could detail about that. And the second component, very important for us, is social acceptability. It means several things. The first one, that people are well informed about the potential impact of technologies. Sometimes the technology will fit the needs of the people. Sometimes the technology will change the needs of the people, will invent new needs. And that is not a problem that a specific technology, artificial intelligence, for example, will create new values, new needs, and so on. But in the end, the decision of the people should be based on free will. This is fundamental. I mean, and this should be, again, in a way related to ethics. And of course, another important aspect is that the artificial intelligence might create differences among different groups, might discriminate people because some people could afford to buy different technologies relating artificial intelligence. Other groups, some people will not have the resources to do that, so you will just create different groups, and that might generate social tension, and we should be careful not to reach that point. So I will stop here for beginning, and maybe we could jump in discussion after this. Thank you.
I will just pick up your idea with ethics, and I'll look at Olivia implicitly. What is the greatest threat? Because there's also security in terms of technology and our relationship with that. But in terms of ethics, what is, it's obvious, fake news and manipulation and so on. We all hear about them repeatedly in different situations. But what is the greatest threat in terms of ethics that AI poses, and what is the greatest benefit?
So I often get asked this question of what is the greatest threat, and people expect me to say deepfakes or AI overlord or something along those lines. Actually, the greatest threat is something very human, and it's that we will forget that at the root of this technology are humans. It came from us. The data that we build off of, the ideas, the models, that all came from us as humans. If we forget, if we start to separate that and start to view, say, our humanity and our technology as separate entities, that to me is the greatest threat, because all of a sudden we're creating something that we don't quite understand, even though it's a reflection of who we are. So to answer your question, the greatest threat is that disconnect from humanity. The greatest benefit is actually, and I think we're supposed to say ally or against AI. I guess I would be an ally for AI responsibly, responsible AI. But I'm more of an ally actually for AI if we look at it as a tool to help us augment our own intelligence, one that we use as a foundation to grow off of and not just stay stuck with, instead of locking ourselves into our current understanding and our current conception, actually being able to use the vast amount of information and data and processing we have at our fingertips to then, as humans, go the step further. That, to me, in the opposite direction, so it still cruxes on that same point of we are centered around humanity as both our biggest risk and our biggest benefit.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think we're trying to humanize AI, and at the same time, like, humans are becoming highly digitized. I think both on the outside, because we're basically cyborgs with the smartphone at the end of our hand, but also on the inside, and probably Professor David here has more insight. Martin, I'm looking at you, and I'm coming to you with a question. You wrote Rise of Robots. And here we are today, basically, trying to figure out why are we living in a reality that you described quite some time ago. What do you foresee for humans and robots in the upcoming future, let's say 5 years? Let's be more daring.
Well, I think that we're going to see a dramatic acceleration, in the technology that's been going on since I started talking about this issue more than a decade ago, and I think it's pretty clear that the pace of progress is picking up. I mean, just within the last year, we've had, of course, all this focus on generative AI, and yet the reality is that we are really in the infancy of this process. So my expectation is that 5 years from now, we're going to be dramatically further along than we are today, and essentially the path that we're on is to push ever closer toward what we would call human-level intelligence. And there are some very smart people who actually think we might achieve that within 5 years. I would be more skeptical of that. I think it will take longer, but undeniably we're going to get closer. And as we get closer, both the benefits of artificial intelligence in terms of the breakthroughs in science and technology and medicine that are going to result from that are going to accelerate, but at the same time, the risks and the potential dangers are also going to escalate. So I think it's going to be an exciting 5 years ahead and beyond that, but I also think there are many, many things that we really need to worry about, not even in the next 5 years, but right now. And those things are going to become more evident. And that's why I think events like this are critical, because we all really need to be part of that conversation, thinking about how we are going to mitigate the dangers and address the concerns that are going to come from this technology.
That's a very insightful and scary answer. I just hope we'll finish. By the time you end your keynote, we'll finish on a much more optimistic note. Paul has started the day with a presentation about AI and AI tools, and a lot of handful tips for people who have no experience in this field to start getting to know AI and to get educated. And I think one of the core elements of your presentation is that, like, AI, as I said, is currently a commercial tool. It helps a lot. Performance, efficiency, repetitive tasks. And how do you think the framework of business is going to change once we start regulating, once we start all these fears that we have expressed in one way or another will generate regulation on AI?
Yeah, the regulation is an interesting aspect. Certainly, the European Union is further along than the United States with their efforts in the AI Act, which, from my understanding, are still a ways away from actually becoming law. And so what Olivia may talk about is I think the key for organizations is really think more about an ethical and moral compass within their organization, because the reality is the laws just aren't going to keep up with the rate of the technology. And so in the United States, there's lots of talk about trying to apply existing laws to AI. So, for example, false advertising. We have something called the Federal Trade Commission that covers the fact you're not allowed to do that. And so they're trying to apply these existing laws and regulations to use of AI. But the reality is it's just a very different technology that's going to enable many things that weren't considered when our previous laws were written. So in the US, they're trying to understand, there are hearings going on, but it is nowhere near a point where we're going to have laws and regulations specific to AI. So I do think many in the United States are watching the European Union and the AI Act, trying to see if those kinds of governance are going to eventually come over. But again, I guide people at an organizational level and at a leadership level. You really need your own responsible AI principles that guide your company, because the laws are not going to keep up.
That's also in an industry that has been heavily changed and shaped in the past 10 years, advertising, publishing, and so on. I have a question from the audience, and they specify here that I would be very interested to find out Professor David's response, but I would like all the speakers to answer to it. Can AI have consciousness? Could this consciousness be detrimental for our social fabric?
I can tell you for sure that yes. It depends how you define that. In psychology, we define that as subjective experience of your existence. And that is very easy to put in an AI algorithm. The problem is a different one if qualia is the same. Qualia means a qualitative component of this subjective experience. And of course, if the implementation level of intelligence in case of humans is related to neurobiology, in case of artificial intelligence, the implementation level is different, right? Qualia might be different, but it doesn't matter. That is not a key component of consciousness. So for me, that is not a question if. I think that if we want to have an artificial intelligence system having consciousness, we can do that right now, focusing on that. Just discuss with cognitive scientists, and we could program that. That is not a problem. But I would follow a little bit your idea, because you talked about human-like artificial intelligence. And indeed, in cognitive sciences, as we know, there are two major paradigms. I mean, there are many, but two are majors. In one paradigm, people try to create artificial intelligence in relationship to humans. This is one approach, but let us remember that we, as humans, we have a lot of limitations. We are doing a lot of mistakes. Why shall we create artificial intelligence which is so similar to humans that we also expect to have a lot of mistakes? But there are some people trying to do that because at the same time we are doing, and we have a lot of mistakes in our activities, but we also have what we call creativity, right? Which is something special, and hopefully that artificial intelligence, which is related to the human model, will also display a higher level of creativity. On the other side, there is another paradigm saying, okay, we just have to create artificial intelligence to solve problems, to put problems, to invent problems, and which should be better than humans. It doesn't matter that this is not like humans. It shouldn't be like humans. It should be something else, more productive, more efficient. So I think that both approaches are important. I just read a debate or a critical analysis of people from Meta about GPT, saying, okay, GPT is very interesting, but in a way GPT reached its limit, because it's based in something which is not related to human intelligence. What they are going to propose is to move the paradigm in the other direction, saying we want to create an artificial intelligence system which is more like humans, meaning that you have an internal representation of the environment, and the intelligent behavior will result from combining those representations. I think that both approaches are important, and we don't know at this moment which one is better, and I think that they shouldn't be in competition. They have different roles. I repeat, if you have a human-like artificial intelligence system, of course, it should do, and it should have a lot of mistakes in its activity, but at the same time, it might have creativity, and the qualia could be more similar to what we have in our consciousness. But we have the other paradigm, the other approach in which artificial intelligence is just better than humans.
I think one thing I'll add to that, I think it's important, the point he brought up, that there is not much agreement in the AI research community about many of these very important issues. So OpenAI and some other research labs believe that solving human language is the path to general intelligence. So if we want these human level and beyond machines, they need to understand and generate language, which is why many of the research labs focused on language. Jan LeCun, who heads up the Meta Research Lab, or Facebook AI Research Lab, he believes machines must have what they call a worldview, which is the observation of the world around us. It's how toddlers learn. So he looks at babies and says they learn by observing around them. Why? They don't need language to know the world around them and be conscious of their existence. So there's differing paths to these endpoints that we're seeking in AI. And that's, again, why I think conferences like this are so important, is there is no one right answer necessarily to many of these questions. There's people coming at it from a cognitive science perspective, a liberal arts perspective, an ethicist perspective. Like, we all look at it in different ways and synthesize what we learn and then try and present that information to other people. And so I think it's an important point to know that there is no uniform agreement on any of these things. There's just educated opinions, and then you need to form your own point of view once you take all that information in.
Thank you. I think it's I'm looking at you. It's your turn. It's like the person who asked the question was very specific. I want answers from everybody. And I think to Olivia, there's also something to add here, because somebody else is like, questions are pouring in. I have 40 questions at the moment, and they're still coming in. But to you, there's one thing more to add and to consider. Is like, they say here, truth will die first. How will ethics survive?
Oof, ouch. Well, okay, I guess I'll cover a little bit of the consciousness question and then lead into how ethics is going to survive, or ethics will always prevail. I sound like an Avenger. But the point about consciousness is, I would bring it back to say, we don't even have an agreement on what consciousness is. So there's this field called philosophy of mind where we study exactly what is and is not consciousness. So I want to actually give you a little bit of a thought experiment so that you walk away thinking, do I actually understand what consciousness is, and how to compare that to artificial intelligence? And it's called brain in a vat. So imagine a brain, put it in a tube, kind of like in a sci-fi movie. You have the brain in the tube. It doesn't exist in a body, but it's functioning. And you give to the brain all of the inputs, all the data inputs about what it would mean to ride a bicycle. So it knows that you have to pedal your feet, that you're steering, that there's wind in your face, but it has no experience of that actual riding a bike. Is the brain conscious of what that experience is to ride the bike? Is that consciousness based solely on the input, or do you actually have to have that experience, that physical experience, to truly understand and know what it is to ride a bike? So I don't have the answer for you. That's a thought experiment. But I want you to take that and think about it as you leave and understand what is consciousness and what is AI and what's my understanding. As Paul was saying, there's lots of educated opinions. What's your educated opinion? And the point about ethics, why ethics will survive, why will avenge ethics. The study and field of ethics has actually existed since ancient times. This is not a new field. I have, let's say, a new profession. Ethicists have existed in the practice of medicine, in politics, and business for for decades. But the study of ethics has existed since ancient Greeks. And we're still grappling with the same questions today as we were back then. So we haven't actually quite answered what are some very simple questions around our humanity. I'll cover in my talk, ethics is innately human. So ethics will always prevail because it is a part of who we are as people, as individuals, and as a society. And I'm sorry to say, you can't get away from that. You are human.
Martin, you have the last take on this, and my colleagues from production tell me that unfortunately we will have to end the talk here, but I have so many questions. Professor David, there's like 20 questions just for you regarding students and AI. I think we have students in the room interested if they can use AI in the future.
No reaction papers and no homeworks.
Okay. So Martin, your last take on consciousness.
Well, I certainly think that it's possible that machines could be conscious. I mean, there's no reason to believe that consciousness couldn't arise in a substrate other than, a brain. But it's also true that we could have, very advanced, even human-level intelligence that is not conscious. You can think about a highly intelligent zombie, basically with no inner experience. And the reality is that we may never know. There isn't any definitive test for consciousness. There's no way to prove that an entity is conscious. So we may have to live with the reality that we're simply not going to know the answer to that question. And in terms of the impact that AI is going to have, the much more important question is how intelligent is it, and how is it going to go about attempting to achieve whatever goals it is given. The question of whether or not it's consciousness is, I think, actually less important than the question of intelligence.
Can I add something briefly?
Sure.
I have a little bit a different view. From my perspective, we really know what is consciousness today. We even have working definitions. We are afraid to assume that, because if you assume a very clear definition that would apply to an artificial intelligence system, we have to change our laws. They have a lot of implications. So we keep saying that consciousness is something not very clear. Let's not discuss about that now. But as you said, there is no reason that artificial intelligence has no consciousness.
That's a great thought to ponder on once we leave the room. And I think that I have to ask you to count on your availability to answer these questions after the event and to exchange some emails, because what we did before in the previous editions, we published articles with the questions, so it's just a Q&A. So thank you for being here and for thinking about AI and sharing your thoughts on it.